Welcome to Thinking Deeply About Primary Education, the podcast that makes time and space to think about pedagogy, teaching and learning, professional development, anything of interest to time-poor but enthusiasm-rich primary teachers. This week, I'm joined by Shannen Doherty.
Hello, lovely to be back.
And Louise McLaughlin.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Listeners to the podcast will know exactly who Shannen is, for better or worse. Interesting facial response there. But Louise, I thought maybe begin with a little bit about who you are and how you got here.
Lovely, thank you. So I've been teaching for almost 20 years and have worked in a number of teaching and leadership roles, mostly in Surrey and central London, and have recently relocated down to Hastings, which is where I've met Shannen, working on the South Coast and teaching with her and talking all things teaching and learning, leadership and general education with her. So I'm really excited to have been invited along.
Great to have you both here, because at the start of this week, we had an interesting announcement from Ofsted, and I thought it'd be really good to see, and I obviously have my own opinions, but it'd be really good to see people in the classroom, people in school, what they think and what this might mean for us. And so the proposal that was made is quite weighty, much too much to cover in one episode. So I thought we'd begin by exploring report cards and the inspection toolkits, and then perhaps come on to the others next week. So I don't know, Shannen, if you want to start maybe a bit, but what are the report cards and what might that look like? What's the proposal?
So the report cards are proposing a 5-point grading system with a range of areas. So things like leadership and governance, curriculum, developing teaching, achievement, behaviour and attitudes, attendance, personal development, wellbeing, inclusion, safeguarding, and then early years or sixth form, depending on what you've got. That's obviously just for schools. It's moving away, obviously, from that one-word judgment that they've stopped doing, and rather than having outstanding, good, requires improvement, and inadequate, they've got this 5-point scale, which they are saying is different. It's interesting that they've changed some of the categories around. They've got some of the, like, obviously you've got leadership in there, that's the same. Personal development is in there, that's the same. I think it's interesting to see that they've added some in, but there's quite a lot in there, and I'm keen to see kind of how this report card system, what the inspection will look and feel like with this new system.
I don't know, I might have gone a little bit deep into research here, but I was really interested in the initial narrative around these new report cards and what they're for and where they've got their research from around developing them and in the way that they've proposed. I've been on Ofsted's website and thinking about the purpose of these report cards, as in, I mean, maybe it's because I've been drilled into that way of thinking of, intent, implementation, impact. Where did that one come from? So I was looking into, what's the purpose of these? Why is this being proposed? And I'm really struck by the responsibility Ofsted say they have to publish reports of their findings so they can be used to improve the overall quality of education and training. One of their development points for their current action plan is to drive higher standards. And then the actual narrative around the proposal talks a lot about parents and giving information to parents about schools. It mentions education for professionals and others. And I'm just trying to work out at the moment, my initial response is how those two things sit together, because they seem quite different.
I mean, when they at the start of the report card bit, they say that 76% of parents were in favor of this kind of thing during the big listen, but it was third, only 53% of teachers. Whereas teachers wanted bullet point summaries, I think, in the majority. No one asked for more Ofsted, no one asked for a more complicated Ofsted, but we seem to have landed on that. It certainly doesn't feel like teachers and education are at the heart of the decision making here, and I'm sure that very, very smart people have put a lot of effort into making this document, this proposal, or this set of whatever they are, but it doesn't have, on my reading, doesn't have teachers at the heart of it. And, as a parent myself, do I read my children's school's Ofsted report? Not really. As long as they're happy and safe, that's really what matters to me. And I'm sure there are people, because obviously the economy and the housing market is dictated to by school grades, etc., and is certainly influenced by it. But my first reaction was, like the more cowbell skit, Christopher Walken saying we just need more Ofsted, and I really don't think that's what teachers wanted or need, because I think it's built on a false premise that we can make these kind of subjective judgments that Ofsted inspectors are qualified, and I don't think there's any way that these cards are created in a consistent, valid, or reliable manner. Because you could have a secondary science teacher going through a primary school, and then you could have a primary maths specialist going through a primary school, and I think you get wildly different outcomes and wildly different opinions. So I think my initial reaction is this is not the evidence based framework that we may think it is or it's been proposed as.
My gut says I agree, but I really want to look into it and find the good, because I don't just want to be like one of those negative Nellies who's like, Ofsted are the enemy, they're the worst thing, because we're going to have to work with them with this. So I was like scrolling through, and then I printed it and I highlighted bits going, oh, that's interesting, that's interesting. I think your point about the parents is so spot on. I've highlighted the word used at the top. It says our inspection reports are used by, and it says parents, providers, government. And used, it like, what do you mean used? How are they used? Is it just a case of going, oh, that old money, outstanding school, I'll go there? Like you said, you don't really read them as a parent. Be interested, Louise, obviously you've got a 3-year-old, and whether or not that's something you're thinking about. Are you looking at Ofsted reports? How much do you buy into it? Is it because you're both teachers that you're thinking that? My gut says anyone who has any dealing with education or knows any teachers will look beyond Ofsted reports. Like our neighbours have been looking at schools around us, and they sort of said, oh, this one's graded, this one's graded this. But that doesn't really mean anything, does it? And we're like, no, go into the school, get a feel for the school. And that's how you'll know if that's the right place. It also, it says we want to provide a more nuanced view of provider strengths and areas for improvement. I don't think adding in another grade makes it much more nuanced. And I know that there's this toolkit which we'll come on to, but it doesn't feel like moving away from outstanding, good, requires improvement, and inadequate to, hold on, exemplary, strong, secure, attention needed, and causing concern is that much different. And it says the middle 3 grades would typically capture where most providers would sit across the range of evaluation areas. Well, surely that's a problem if most of them are sitting between strong, secure, and then attention needed, which is why, do you remember years ago there was that talk of Ofsted moving to pass fail? And while I don't like the word fail, I do think are we not better off saying, yes, this school does this, and then if it's a case of no, this school isn't doing this, there's a mechanism for that support to be provided? Because I'm sure it says it somewhere in this consultation document, but Ofsted are constantly talking about how they improve schools and they develop schools and they work with schools, they improve, they have some sort of role in there, but they really don't. All they do, like you said, is they come in, they provide this probably quite inaccurate snapshot judgment, and then the school has to do the work, or the trust, or the local authority, the school improvement person, the people in the building do the work. It's not, Ofsted aren't the people improving schools. I think they think that through this more nuanced approach, that's what they will be doing. And I don't think that, I don't see how this is any better or any different. It feels a bit like we've said we're going to do something, so now we're going to do it. Look, we've got this consultation document, we've changed the words, but like exemplary and outstanding, okay, same level. Strong and secure for good, attention needed for requires improvement and cause for concern inadequate. We're just talking about the same levels. It's like when the kids get a thesaurus out and they go, "Oh, I need a better word for this." It doesn't feel like they've thought about the meat on the bone. I don't know. I feel like I've gone into a negative spiral. Someone else talk.
I know what you're saying, Shannon, about not wanting to be the super negative, like, oh, Ofsted, no, the enemy. And I want to think that this is a step in a good direction. And I keep coming back to reasons why it doesn't feel like that, especially because the report cards is the first point in this report, isn't it? So that's what you're upfronted with. And what you said, Kieran, about teachers, it not feeling like teachers are at the heart of this, that the video that's linked in this consultation report to the YouTube video of Sir Martin Oliver talking about the report card, that pretty much just appeals to parents for their views. What do you think as a parent about this? And does it make sense to you? Do you understand it? It's not really about the actual inspection of schools and what that does, what that looks like. It feels a little bit like teachers versus parents as well. In that sense, it feels a bit set up to be like that, which I think in a post-pandemic world we already feel like that. I think teachers do feel a bit of a barrier between schools and parents. We do all know people who've had those kinds of challenging situations and conversations where there's a little bit of trust has been lost between schools and parents with everything that happened during the pandemic and school closures. So that feels a little unhelpful. I also think that the visual that's presented in that video of this mock-up of the report card, why have we got the grades listed with the areas underneath? Because it feels then like the grade is the important thing, because that's what you see right at the top. And it starts with causing concern. That's what you have on the left-hand side. Now, I get that there's this whole, it's a bit like a number line, that it goes from left to right, kind of low to high. However, you could reverse that, because why are we just like immediately, I'm looking at my report card and the very first box that I'm looking at, the first thing is this red box that says causing concern. Maybe there's nothing underneath it, but even so, that's cognitively, that's what's happening. Visually, that's what's happening to me. So it just feels like there's these little bits that somehow it feels very us and them, and teachers versus parents. And parents, what do you think about it, rather than literally anybody else?
I think what you said is really, really important, because, we all need to be moving in the same direction. We all have the same goals. And really, every single, piece in this really intricate puzzle needs to be in the right place, doing the right things. And it's, I'm not, I mean, there's a literal 4 or 5 year record of me not being anti-Ofsted and supporting decisions they've made when they're sensible and when they encourage a reduction in workload, or when they are based on evidence-informed approaches to teaching, learning, and leadership, or whatever. But I am anti-teachers doing silly stuff, because I wasted so much of my 20s doing silly stuff like triple marking and things like that there, which was, again, brought on by the inspectorate. And so I think there needs to be a level of accountability in terms of how is this going to manifest, for you, Shannen, for you, Louise, in terms of, right, okay, we got this really detailed report card. How are they going to get Ofsted inspectors to actually fill this whole thing in? Because it looks like their reports have just sort of gone up compared to what they are now. But actually, we know this doesn't work with pupil assessment. All it's going to do is drive similar levels of workload. Obviously I'm speculating, but we know how much ineffective assessment drives workload in schools. What's that going to be like for you guys? Because really we need an inspector that's saying, okay, and I think, I can't remember if it was you, Shannen, or Louise, that said, like, they claim to have been driving improvement. But I think option one, where they say yes, no, that binary you talk about, and then take the school improvement element away from Ofsted, and actually people in schools all the time supporting schools, like you do, Shannen, with your multi academy trust, but having something comparable for local authority schools. So you're not just weighing the pig all the time. You're actually giving people the detailed feedback that they need to improve, because a high stakes, stressful encounter and we'll get on to the renewed or the proposed sort of schedule and visit composition next week. But I think, school development, school improvement doesn't happen because of the inspector. It happens in spite of it, in my experience. And I've had something like 9 inspections in my career, and none of them ever really drove what I was doing. So perhaps Labour should change the law that requires that cause for concern, and or maybe it doesn't even need to. Maybe it's just, in my mind, kids are safe, kids aren't safe. Those are your 2 qualifying factors. And then everything else is taken over by some sort of school improvement body that's accountable. Because when the body that's driving school improvement, in air quotes, isn't really that accountable, I don't think it's driving school improvement.
The Ofsted report is not necessarily the biggest driver for school improvement. Schools take those bullet points and turn them into a school improvement plan, which inevitably changes because schools are constantly changing. The children, the intake of the children is constantly changing year on year, and even throughout a single year, the children that you have in the classes and in your building changes, and it changes the school's priorities in a way that very quickly can move away from those snapshot point in time judgments about what the school is or isn't doing particularly well on that 1 or 2 days. Back in, January was the last one that I did. Last January. No, it was 2 years ago now. Just after I came back from maternity leave, which I was very cross about because they'd had all that time to come in, and they waited until I'd just come back from maternity leave to hideously cold weather days in January. What did we say? And what did we show Ofsted? And which children were in school that day? And 3 years later, are those bullet points still the things that we are really going for, and the things that we know are the most important drivers to the improvement of our school? No, probably not. And that variability in the length of time between inspections, I think, can make a massive difference as well. We've all worked in, or at least known of, schools which are vastly different from one inspection to the next. The leadership might be completely different. The teaching staff might be completely different. Anything and everything can happen between one inspection and the next inspection. And I still keep coming back around, as you were saying, Kieran. It was me who said about the that responsibility for driving school improvement. I keep coming back to that and thinking the report card doesn't, for me, seem to match that purpose. At the very little that I've looked into it so far, it's only been a few days. But also, I don't know if that is the right purpose. Does that sound like the right purpose? Now, going off what you just said, Kieran, about should that be removed from the inspectorate, and actually that work of are children safe or not safe, and that is pass or fail? Is that a better role for that particular organisation?
Smarter people than me will have thought about. I just haven't caught any blogs, and there are people I'm looking out to see what they say. That's just my gut reaction. But I've always sort of wanted a reduction in their sort of responsibility because of the reasons I've already outlined. I think we're spoiled with some of the greatest thinkers on how teachers get better at the minute in the UK and Ireland, and we're not making the most of them. Lots of people are. You guys at Aquinas absolutely are. Lots of trusts that I talk to are. But yeah, I think there's a trick being missed.
Can I pick up on something you said? Probably several minutes ago at this point, but it's still in my head. You said about the workload that this will create. And actually, one of the things I've written down is that I think workload should have been one of the bullet points, and I know it will come. I know it will come into leadership, and I get that. But I think it's important enough that it should be its own bullet point. It should be its own area to inspect. And actually, I know, we're still talking report card and not toolkit, but I'm looking at the toolkit and staff wellbeing and workload. The statements for that are only under strong, secure, and or whatever it was, area of attention needed. And you can't get exemplary. You can't get cause for concern, like from what I can gather. Although it says staff workload is unsustainable. It's this. I know it's a new document, but I don't know how well this has been thought out, and that you've got loads of cause for concern things that don't actually fit into any of the other categories. I don't know why is that not more important? I'm really glad they put developing teaching in there. Like I said this to Louise earlier before we left work. We were chatting about it. It's one of the ones I'd highlighted, and I was like, I'm so glad that's in there, because the work, like you said, that we've been doing at Aquinas for the last few years, we've been kind of saying to everyone, this is really important. At some point, people are going to want to quality assure this. And, I'm not saying we do things for Ofsted, but we've been saying, pretty sure at some point, Ofsted will even start talking about this, because even in the, we've had all of our schools have been inspected in the last 3 years. And we had that spate of a lot in one go, where I was constantly sending messages being like, oh, another one. And, we've had one very recent one. We had one before Christmas. We had one in November. So we've had quite a few even this term. And like workload and teacher development, they cropping up. So the fact that they've put teacher development in there but not workload is frustrated me, because that kind of then goes in with what we were saying about the teachers aren't being put first. Because if the teachers were, I'm glad developing teaching in there, but if the teachers were being put first, workload would be something that they're actively looking at. And we've had, like, the DfE have released things on workload and wellbeing. So they've done that, but then we're not going to go in, like, if we're checking all of these things, we're then not going to check that thing. And I know it comes into leadership, but within leadership, there's a whole other load of things that they're looking at. And I just worry that some schools will get away with it. And that is one of the biggest issues when you look at retention and recruitment, you look at turnover of staff. Why would that not be a thing that they're going to really focus their attention on? If they're focusing their attention on these extra things, attendance, why are they not thinking about workload? Because if you're focusing on attendance now, let me tell you, that's going to create more of a workload. And it just bothers me that it's not important enough to have its own bullet point and its own section. It's just an afterthought, literally the last part of the leadership toolkit. Ugh, I'm just getting more and more frustrated the more we talk about this.
Sorry, Shannen. I mean, the attendance one's interesting, because if you ever listen to Richard Selfridge, who is someone who understands how to interpret data, talking about attendance figures, it's actually not really that different. Not much has changed over the last 10 to 15, 20 years. And so the fact that it's, this big issue, obviously it's really important that children go to school all the time, and the pandemic did see a dip and stuff. But, with all data used in school, people who aren't qualified to interpret data are interpreting lots of data, and probably data they don't need to be, which feeds into workload, because things like data drops, things like marking, these are the things that really you could tell when a school should be pulled up on things. And then you see the report and they're not, and you're like, well, we'll just keep going the way we were in 2003 and hope that enough teachers stick around to teach. So I think nail on the head. I mean, shall we transition to the education inspection toolkits? For anyone who's not seen them, they are basically APP grids on steroids. So whenever you said you've been teaching nearly 20 years, Louise, I could understand your reaction when I mentioned APP grids earlier on. Those were the things I spent my weekends doing in my early 20s, where I would color different sheets with different vague statements about pupil learning, in the hope that Ofsted thought it was okay when they came around and checked it, because I certainly wasn't using it for pupil assessment. So what do we think about the use of APP grids to measure school attainment or progress in these inspections?
I would like to bring back the word that we've mentioned a few times now in the most recent minutes of this discussion, which is workload. Having mentioned the intent, implementation, impact triad from the most recent inspection framework. I remember that also creating additional workload, because as soon as that came out, I don't know about anybody else, but the school I was working in at the time, the trust I was working in at the time, suddenly said, right, everybody, we need to have an intent. We need to have an intent for everything around the school, for every curriculum area, and probably some stuff to do with the nativity or the playground as well. Everything was, what's our intent, what's our implementation, what's our impact? And even at the time thinking, well, I don't really know what that means. I'm not really sure what we're trying to achieve here and why we have to suddenly write some words that fit into these small boxes under these vague headings. So I do have also very dark memories of the APP times. You're right, Kieran, horrors of those. And yeah, concerns that schools will feel that they need to use them as their own in-house APP grids, essentially, and rate themselves against them and use them for internal quality assurance and, the proverbial stick to beat their school improvement with, if you like.
But what's that phrase that we used to hear? Unintended consequences. That's what they'll say. They'll say, no, we didn't mean that. No, don't do that. That's not what we wanted you to do. But that's exactly what's going to happen. Because I imagine every person listening had to write an intent statement and probably an implementation and impact statement as well. And it's not it's not good enough to go, oh, we didn't want you to do that though, because that's the message you're sending. So the message that is sent through these documents is, you should be looking at these things. You should be rating yourself against these. Like you said, internal quality assurance, trust level quality assurance, local authorities will start looking at these. People's school improvement plans, like you said, Louise, will start to be written around these headings, and they will be down to the ridiculous granular level that some of these statements are. And again, there's like this part of me that was going, I need to see the good in it. And the kind of the grain of good that I think I could see, I'm probably being too generous. But I think that we all know that there's that kind of the feeling that it depends on what your inspector's like on the day, and that there's too much kind of disparity between what they're like and the quality and the kindness and how they go about inspecting, or whether they get a kick out of grilling people and making them cry, or if they go in and they're really friendly and say, no, we're going to do this together. And there is always going to be a range when you've got an inspectorate that large. So part of me is thinking, if they put these in to be really specific to the inspectors, saying, these are the things you should be looking at, we want it to be even more crystal clear for you going in, so that there's no confusion and there's no way that we can get one person one day having a really good experience, really fair experience, and another person the next day not, because we're laying it all out for you. And part of me thinks that's why they're doing this, why they've gone to this APP method. But I don't think that's the right way. Sure, like everything that I say, Louise is probably bored of hearing it, is it's all about the training, it's all about the professional development that you give these people. So surely, rather than spending your time writing the APP for Ofsted grids, spend your time training your inspectors, shadowing your inspectors, quality assuring your inspectors. I just don't feel like this is going to bring much good, because I can very well see people's school improvement plans now being leadership and governance, curriculum, developing teaching, achievement in national tests and examinations, achievement across the curriculum, behaviour and attitudes, attendance, personal development and well-being, inclusion, early years or sixth form. And I just think it's mad. And I can see that there'll be schools or leaders who are not doing it because they want to be horrible and toxic. They're doing it because they think it's the right thing to do, and they're worried that if they don't do it, they'll get calls for concern or attention needed, which I think I now know is that fourth level. It is attention needed. I've finally remembered it. But they will have points under every single header. And then when you go into the toolkit, so let's pick a random one. Let's pick achievement across the curriculum. You've got progress through the curriculum. Then you've got pupils have relevant and appropriate knowledge and fluency, reading, writing, mathematics, and language and communication. So you've got two then sub areas within the achievement across the curriculum area, which means that then people are going to keep drilling their school improvement plans down until they're in this ridiculous long document. This is a 30-page document, and I'm guessing that lots of people's school improvement plans will be half this length, if not the same length. And I can't see how that's going to drive improvement. It's also too scattergun. You're not improving all of these things at once, but people will start thinking we have to have something under each strand. And I know it's going to be, oh, we didn't intend you to do that, but that's the message you're sending when you lay out a document like this. It really bothers me that we haven't just taken longer to think about what this could be like. It feels like this has come out unnecessarily quickly. I know they've come in, I know we've got Send Out and Oliver, and I know that, they need to be seen to be having an impact. But it feels like they've gone, we've done a big listen, well, you didn't listen hard enough to the teachers because this is not what we wanted. And honestly, the parents I know, this report's going to be longer. There's more areas, there's more to read. It's like children's reports. I don't know many parents who want a 5-page long report with a comment for every subject. So do we really want a really long report with a comment for all of these areas? Sometimes it's good enough to just say this school is educating your children well and the children are safe and wonderful. Let's now move on with our lives. I think I'd even welcome more frequent visits if they weren't focusing on all of this stuff. If we didn't have a published written report that laid bare all the stuff that they saw in those 2 days or whatever it's going to be, and I'd rather they just kept popping in like a learning walk, and that it was just like this little and often, not that often, but little and slightly more often, rather than having this snapshot that isn't probably accurate, then sticks with a school for years. And like you said, Louise, there's some people have a really long time between inspections, and so some schools will be stuck with this for 5 years. Some might be stuck with it for longer. It feels short-sighted. It feels like they wanted to say, look, we've listened and we've done something, but I don't see it going well unless you have really, really smart, confident leaders of schools and trusts and local authorities who aren't idiots, because you're going to get people who go, we must do this now, we must change our school improvement plans, and it's going to cause chaos and upset and ultimately maybe drive more people out of the job. I don't think it's going to do anything for recruitment or retention. I'm just ranting and ranting and ranting.
I mean, you mentioned people becoming teachers and stuff, but there are definitely things that would warrant greater focus than this. For instance, things that are really tough in schools, like budgets and supporting pupils with special educational needs. And I'm trying to think, there was a third priority that certainly the NEHT men have mentioned. Things that are, like you said, we didn't really need this now. How about you sort out the criminal underfunding of schools and the sort of lack of support in the most challenging of circumstances? That might be a good place to start, but I don't know why. I mean, when I saw this, my first reaction was, this is wall-to-wall guff, because Michael Tate did a really good thing, didn't he? He was like, which one's better? And then he would take these statements and he would pose it to his audience on Blue Sky, because I'm not on Twitter anymore. He might have done it on Twitter too, but I saw it on Blue Sky. And people were like, oh, I don't know. It's even the language used is totally subjective. And we know that these kind of broad statements don't work. We know that when you're talking about school or when you're talking about teacher improvement, you be very, very specific so the parity can be employed across all assessments. When you choose the thing you're going to work on for this term with your coach or whatever, it's very, very specific. And I would imagine the two should be comparable. Suffice to say that, whether the intention was to improve the reality for teachers, I think from an actual whether this kind of thing actually works when measuring things, when evaluating things, whether this kind of thing is actually possible. Everything I've read to this point suggests that it's not, which is why we stopped using APP grids, which is why we stopped having national curriculum levels. Or, well, we sort of stopped having national curriculum levels. And so when I looked at this, it was as if a satirist, I don't know if you remember Brass Eye with Chris Morris and he used to do the day to day on the hour on the radio, and basically he would do these really big satirical political things, and it was as if he'd made this, and he was a Friday night chat show. So I don't know, Louise, what your thoughts are, but I don't know where to begin really.
Can we talk semantics for a couple of minutes? Because listening to what you were just saying, Shannen, I suddenly remembered something that I'd meant to say about the toolkits. They're called toolkits. My initial reaction when I started reading this document was, oh, toolkits. Is that so what? We have all these toolkits for our schools now that we have to use to, kit our tools with. That we have to, it's an APP grid, right? It comes across to me as very much a self-assessment tool because it's called a toolkit. And then something else that I think you said earlier, Shannen, was about these headings, these names of the categories, that they're not really different. Like you say, it's a bit thesaurus approach to just what's another word for. And then the content of these, now they're just APP grids. I can't even say toolkits. The content of our APP grids for school inspection, it's just, the whole thing feels a lot like the same words in a slightly different order with the glossy coating of, but we've changed it, it's going to be better, and nobody's going to feel as stressed as they used to, and schools will be better and everyone will be happier. But also we've added a couple of extra headings in, so your toolkits are a little bit longer. So if you could just do that work as well, that would be great. We really have gone negative on it now, haven't we? It's
we tried our best. I mean, it's hard not to. Like I said, I know people will have worked really hard on this, but this podcast is, for whatever, I don't know, it's trying to speak truth to power, trying to give teachers a voice, and I will happily give the inspectorate, the government, their due when they do things that are in the best interest of our children and our teachers and our school leaders. But I do think there needs to be a written or recorded oral record of, I don't know if disgust is too, but I was quite upset, and I'm not even school-based at the minute, so I don't know how you guys are feeling, because I said to Kate, if this actually goes through the proposal, you've really got to consider whether or not that's the environment you want to exist in. And I'm trying to be I think being into education is fantastic. I think teaching is the best job in the world. I think we need the best people in our schools helping our children, especially those children who need it the most. But with things like these, why? You're not making education a place that people want to be, and you either don't respect it or you don't know how to fix the issues that we've got. And if it's the latter, well, then put your hands up and say, well, we need to get the brightest people we have together who have been in class, who are working in schools, and ask them to say what this framework might look like. We need to prioritize the profession. We need to prioritize children's educations, and we can make glib statements about our attainment on the national stage and about how schools are getting better. But there's not really anything in this proposal so far that would suggest that any of that is a result of the inspectorate. So I don't know. It's very hard to be positive when you can see what's coming, when you've lived through the dark days of Ofsted once and do learn the dance. when you've lost your hair because of that, when you're scraping snow off a sidewalk the day before, the inspection, because the school will be closed otherwise, but you've got an inspection the next day, so you're keeping it open. I could see the writing on the wall here, and I'm very, very disappointed.
I feel like before we wrap up, we should get maybe kind of nerdy and look at some of the statements, and because I'm currently looking at attendance. I think there are issues with grading schools on attendance. I mean, having worked in mostly schools that would be in what would be considered quite disadvantaged areas with high pupil premium, free school meals, and one particularly affluent school, there was a clear difference in the attendance of those schools. And I'm not saying that, families that have free school meals don't get their children to school as a rule. I'm just saying that there was a difference in the attendance. And I think it's really interesting that, like, in the causing concern bit, it says attendance is consistently low for all pupils or for groups of pupils and shows little sign of sustained improvement. It's really hard to improve attendance. And for that to be in the causing concern really worries me. But then when you look at the other statements, almost all of them start with leaders. Leaders prioritize, leaders analyze, leaders do not identify, and then leaders work with families. Leaders. So then I'm scrolling through others, and I'm now on behaviour and attitudes. Leaders establish high expectations. Expert leadership creates strong shared culture of positive behaviour. So much of this focuses on the leaders. And I think if you scroll through these APP grids for Ofsted, so much of it starts with leaders. So then I'm like, well, why is that not part of leadership and governance? It just feels strange to me that so much of this stuff starts with leaders. I know it does. We all know what makes or breaks a school. It is the leadership. So then why not just focus on that? Why not focus on any of these specific areas and just have a different way of inspecting schools? I know, like, I might get some of the details of this wrong, so forgive me, people in the Isle of Man. But Max Kelly, who was, I haven't heard from him for a while, but he was exec head of a couple of schools in the Isle of Man. And we talked once at a conference about the differences between Ofsted and how they inspect schools there. And he was saying it's much more of a, here's my self-evaluation. Some people come in and we talk about whether or not we agree. And it was more of a collaborative process and less of a done to. And I just feel like, why have we not tried something like that? Why is it always, I'm going to come in, I'm going to judge. And actually all they're doing really is talking about the school leadership. But when you then start going into things like curriculum and you start thinking about other areas and inclusion and safeguarding and personal development and behaviour, like, other people will feel the weight of those judgments when ultimately it all comes down to leadership. Like, I fundamentally don't believe that schools get negative Ofsted reports because of a teacher or some TAs or the children. It happens because of leadership decisions. And I'm really sorry if I'm upsetting anyone who is a school leader, but generally that's what's happened. So maybe there's a different way of doing it, because so many of these statements start with leaders. So why have we even got all of these different categories if ultimately it comes down to the decisions that leaders have made? I just feel frustrated now. I'm scrolling through and I see leaders. It just feels like they've just written some statements in a table and haven't necessarily thought about the weight of it and the impact of it, which is strange considering they're an organisation that made us think about the impact for so long. Are they actually thinking about the impact this will have? Probably not. I just think it will drive people out of the profession. I can't see a positive to this right now. It'll drive leaders out as well, and then you'll get inexperienced people taking up leadership roles, not doing a good job, then they'll leave, and we'll just be on this doom cycle. Yeah, doom cycle. That's what I'm going to call this.
A quick find function has just told me that the word leaders comes up 200 times in the toolkit document, and teachers is mentioned 20 times.
That's the kind of analysis I love. That is awesome, Louise. And I think it speaks for itself. So we said we come back next week and we will explore points 3 through 5 on the proposal. So basically, we've got a week to find something positive, because this feels like one of the most depressing episodes of Tadape so far. But I think it's important that we have this conversation. I have enjoyed the chat because I think it's interesting. I think it's important that we talk about it. And I'm looking forward to next week. So all that's left to do is say thank you very much, Louise.
Thank you so much, Kieran. It was great to be here.
Thank you, Shannen.
Thank you for having me.
And everyone at home, until next time, sorry and thanks for listening.